Hello everyone, this is Robert and this is the Gweike G2 20-watt fiber laser. I've always wanted to have a fiber laser out in my shop. I do a lot of stuff with metal, so it'd be really nice to mark and engrave metal, and the fine detail and all that good stuff that goes along with the fiber is just really exciting to me. Gweike is offering this on Kickstarter, and a lot of companies are using Kickstarter for product launches now, so that's nothing new. But they're offering this for an introductory early bird pricing of only $1,500, which is pretty bonkers and game-changing for a 20-watt fiber laser from a legitimate company. Obviously, if you choose some options and stuff like that, it goes up a little bit from that. And after the Kickstarter, it's going to go up to $2,500. But that is an amazing price for a fiber. So what I want to do is kind of go through this, explain what fiber lasers are versus CO2 diodes, things like that, what you can do with a setup like this, and then just kind of do a basic rundown of this machine. In a future video, I'll kind of go a little bit more into detail, show you a little bit more about what you can do. I'm going to demonstrate it. I just got this. This is my first fiber ever, so I need to play with it a little bit more. So that'll be in the future video. But for right now, let's just kind of take a look at this, and I'll kind of explain what fiber lasers can do versus the other lasers that are out there. So before we get too far into this video, be sure to check out the chapters down below so you can skip around in the video. And I also, of course, have the affiliate links and everything for the Kickstarter. If you like what you see, go ahead and use those down below. So let's talk about fiber lasers. What are fiber lasers? Why are they important? And why should you continue watching this video? Well, if you do anything with metal, you know that a diode laser and a CO2 laser really don't do a whole lot. They don't have the appropriate wavelength to penetrate into metal or do any kind of meaningful engraving. That is where a fiber laser comes in. And I know people are going to ask instantly, so I'm going to get this right out of the way. Can it cut metal? No, it can't cut metal. It can maybe cut, like I think they say, like 0.3 millimeters, something like that, but that isn't how you use these machines. These machines are specifically designed to mark, engrave metal surfaces. So you can do stainless, titanium, aluminum, things like that. They have the appropriate wavelength to actually engrave or etch on the surface of metals. And the other cool thing about fibers is they have a very, very small dot size, a very small beam size, so very high concentration of energy in a very small spot, and they can move very quickly. So even though 20 watts doesn't really seem like that much, you see these big CO2 lasers or even big diode lasers now that have much more higher wattage than that. 20 watts in a fiber is enough to do some really interesting things. So let's take a quick look at what a fiber laser can do. And if you've been using CO2 or diode, you will see that this is quite different. So I've got one of these metal business cards. You can actually get these on Amazon pretty cheap. It's just an aluminum business card that's been anodized black, and we're going to go ahead and engrave this with the design. And there we go. This was real time, what you saw. We've got a QR code down at the bottom. And this line right there might be hard to see on camera, but that is 1 millimeter tall text. It says tiny sample text, and it is perfectly readable by the naked eye. So if this is the first time you've ever seen a fiber laser work, you might realize just how fast that is. And the reason it's so much faster than a CO2 or a diode laser is because it doesn't have this large gantry that you're moving around. As you can see, it doesn't really look like there's any moving parts. And the way it works is inside here you actually have the fiber source. It travels out this fiber optic cable, fiber laser, travels out that fiber optic cable into the head over here, and then the laser beam is actually steered with a series of mirrors. This is a galvo head, and none of this is really unique to the Gweike. This is kind of just how fiber lasers work, but you have a galvo head that will steer the lens or steer the laser beam around. Now, the interesting thing is if you have the beam up here and it's being steered around, when it gets over here, it's going to be at a different focal length than it is here. So this lens right here is going to be correcting for that. It will actually correct that laser beam so that you get a flat plane along that whole working envelope, which is 100 by 100 millimeters or 4 inches by 4 inches. And this lens is pretty standard. A lot of these components are fairly standard across many different lasers, and this one has a 210 millimeter focal length and then that 100 by 100 millimeter focal plane, which is pretty interesting stuff. Another nice feature about fiber lasers with a galvo head is you can actually see a preview. How many times have you been using a diode or a CO2 laser and you just wanted to view a preview of the outline? Well, you can do that with the galvo head because it moves so quickly. All we have to do is turn on auto red, and it'll give us a nice little preview of what we're cutting, so we can change the positioning. It looks like it's a little bit low. Move that up. That should be good. And then we'll turn on the laser and just go ahead and mark this. And there we go. Nice and pretty. So as I talked about in the beginning of the video, a fiber laser is primarily used to engrave or mark metal materials. So it doesn't have to be coated like what you saw with the aluminum. It can be raw aluminum, raw steel, raw stainless, things like that. You can just basically etch or engrave the top surface. These are really well suited for like an industrial environment where you're marking a serial number, you're marking a barcode, you're marking some sort of warning text on metals, but you can also do them for interesting things like the business cards that you saw, do some interesting designs. I'm actually going to be using this on my combat robot drain bandage to do a really cool design on the top. And the cool thing is that the engraving, it's permanently on there. It's not going to wipe off or rub off. Like if you use a CO2 laser with the Surmark, you know, that kind of marking material, you know, stuff like that can kind of rub off a little bit or sand off, or you might not get a consistent finish. This thing is going to have a permanently etched surface. If you've ever bought a knife, I think is a good example, and it has kind of like the maker's logo or it has the steel, that is going to be a fiber laser. So it's good at marking metals. Things it won't do, pretty much anything that you're going to use a CO2 or a diode laser, this isn't going to do. You can put a piece of wood under there and absolutely nothing will happen. It will just kind of go across the surface and there's nothing on there. Dark pigments it can etch and remove, so really dark woods it can kind of do that, but you're not going to be using this with organic materials. The majority of what you're going to be doing with this is going to be either painted or anodized materials or metals. Another interesting aspect of a fiber laser is the ability to adjust the frequency of the pulse coming out of it. With a CO2 or a diode laser, you basically have the power and then you have the speed. And those are the only two parameters that you can play with, and you can kind of adjust those up or down to kind of get different results. But with a fiber laser, you can actually adjust the frequency as well, and that will kind of change the way the engraving looks. So for stainless steel, for instance, you can kind of go a little bit darker or a little bit lighter, and by changing those three parameters, you can kind of change the finish that you're getting. Higher end lasers like MOPA type lasers, they can actually also adjust the pulse width, and you can almost do like full color engravings, which is kind of crazy. But for the more entry level lasers, you can only adjust the frequency. But by adjusting the frequency, you can kind of change the color a little bit. I need to play a little bit more with this. The parameters are kind of crazy when you start adjusting the speed, the power, and the frequency, and it's also material dependent, so I need to get a bunch of different materials and play with some different things. But it is kind of interesting that in theory you could do one set of engraving with one frequency, another set of engraving with a different frequency, and they would be different colors or at least different finishes or different shades, so you could use that to differentiate, which is pretty cool and a feature only found in fiber lasers. So this might be a little bit difficult to show up on video, but I wanted to give you an idea of what kind of fine detail you can get out of a laser like this. So I'm going to do a design that my wife was playing around with, and I'll kind of try and get as close up as I can with it to show you the details. So here's a close-up look of this, and you can just see how small everything is, but everything is perfectly crisp. Even inside these, it's just like all the lines are just absolutely perfect, and that only took a couple seconds. So let's talk pros and cons. And when I'm talking about pros and cons, I'm not necessarily talking about the Gweike G2 versus everything else out there. I'm mostly talking about fiber lasers versus CO2 or diode, because that's kind of really what I'm focusing on at this point in the video. So for fiber lasers, the big pro is it can engrave metal. You can kind of do this with some diodes, and you can kind of do this with CO2, with some coatings, things like that, but nothing is going to beat just the quick ease of use, speed of a fiber laser for engraving metal. And obviously, as you can see, it is extremely fast. This is probably one of the fastest solutions that you're ever going to have. If you're doing metal engraving, sure, you can bring it over to like a CNC mill with a high-speed spindle and engraving bit, but nothing is going to beat just the actual speed that you can do on a fiber laser. It is also a relatively small form factor. I'll show this kind of later in the features and specs section, but it is a pretty portable device, so it is relatively small. Granted, you have a relatively small work envelope, we'll get to that later, but it is a nice, small, and portable thing. It doesn't have like a water chiller and all that other stuff that goes along with some CO2 lasers. This is also great for prototyping and marking in an industrial environment. So let's say you want to engrave serial numbers. The software that comes with these has a really great feature to where every single time you mark, it will increment up. So you can easily do serial numbers for batch tracking, things like that, doing QR codes. It's really well suited for production environments. It is also very good at fine details. I'm going to show this here in a bit, but as you saw from this demonstration of the 1mm text, I think the smallest I was able to go down with this was 0.75 or 3/4 of a millimeter, and it's still totally readable. You can get out your little magnifying loupe and look at it, and it looks totally fine. And the last thing that is really nice about this machine is it has a really long lifespan. This is essentially, at the heart of it, is a diode laser source that's running through fiber optics. This has 100,000 hours. So basically, as long as an LED can last, this is going to last. With a CO2 laser, you're always worried about shortening the life of it, but with a fiber laser, you don't have to worry about that. So now let's talk about the cons. The cons is kind of hard to talk about with this machine because what it does well, it really does well, and what it doesn't do well, it just kind of doesn't do. I have cost listed as one of the cons, and when it comes down to it, is a 20-watt laser with a 4" by 4" or 100mm by 100mm marking area for $1,500 for the early bird price, and then $2,500 is a normal price. You can get a really nice, or several really nice diode lasers for that price, and you can start getting easily into larger CO2 territory for that price. So we can't really look at it like that, because what it does something very differently, and it's very specialized. So I think ultimately, the only con of a device like this is that it is very specialized. It is very good at doing one thing. It does it very fast. It does it very efficiently, very effectively, but that's pretty much all it does. You throw some wood in there, doesn't do it. Throw some, acrylic, other than black acrylic, just really doesn't do it, and is a very small working area. So you have to really have the need for a fiber laser to really justify it, but it can do some really cool things, as you've seen. And what it does very cost effectively because there's no real consumables, and it does it very fast. So now let's talk a little bit about the Gweike G2 specifically. Basically comes in 3 pieces that you see here. We have the power supply and the laser source here. We have the head, and then we kind of have the base and the stand. In terms of the actual laser, this is a 20-watt Raycus, and in my research I found that there's basically 3 main brands. You have Max on the low end, you have Raycus kind of in the middle, and then I forget what the third one is, but that's kind of on the higher end and way outside this price category. But the fact that this comes with a Raycus is kind of nice. A lot of the competing lasers in this price point come with the Max, which is a lot lower end unit. At least that's what I have found. In terms of frequency, this is 25 kilohertz to 60 kilohertz. At least that's what they're telling me, but that is just basically standard on the Raycus 20-watt laser module. Comes in this nice little box. I'll kind of turn this around and look at it later. Laser comes into this head, and we have the standard 210 millimeter focal length, and then we have a 110 by 110 for the lens. That's just kind of what the lens is, but a 100 millimeter by 100 millimeter working area. And I'm going to get into this stand later, but yeah, that's pretty much all the basic stats on it. Let's look at the back of this guy. So here is a closer look at the back panel for the actual laser source. You have the fiber optic cable coming out here. This is like a communication cable that gets sent over to the head. You have the power supply, and then this is the power that goes over to the head. And the nice thing about this is it comes with a really beefy Meanwell power supply, and it's kind of nice to see an actual name brand power supply with it, but this is what it comes with. And then on the side, we can see all of the cooling fans. The only thing that I'm not super thrilled about is these little feet. They just kind of like press in there, and it has some roller balls at the bottom. It's kind of an odd thing. I've never really seen anything like that. It definitely functions fine, but yeah, just maybe a little bit strange. This whole thing is quite solid. It's a really nice feeling unit overall. We've got a little carry handle on the top. You have your e-stop button as well as the laser on and off. So yeah, pretty simple and nice, kind of like, you know, suitcase style form factor. This is what the main laser unit looks like. You basically have this platform, you've got the arm, and then you have the actual laser head up here with a nice little handle on it. Since the focal adjustment is manual, you have a little knob up here which adjusts the head up and down. What this doesn't have, which I'm kind of bummed out, is it doesn't have any scales or markings along the side. There's no little flag that comes out to, you know, mark where you are. I might have to 3D print or make something that kind of comes off of this so that it can kind of mark at some preset distances. Like if you're always doing something that's an inch tall, maybe it'd be kind of nice to have a marker where you just kind of adjust up to that line, something like that. But that's how this is. The base, however, is kind of neat. All of these holes that you see are threaded and tapped, and this base plate actually comes out. This is nice for me because for work, I think what I'm going to do is make some kind of pallet system. I might even like 3D print one of these, so you can load up the pallet off the machine and just kind of swap them back and forth. Because this is so quick, this might only take, you know, a minute or so, so you can be loading up the other one off of it and then just swap them out. So that's actually pretty cool, and all of these holes, even out to the side, are tapped as well. It comes with a couple of these little laser cut L brackets. They're nothing too special. They're nothing all that nice, but they screw in and you can use that as kind of a guide to slide in your workpiece in theory. For the back of this unit, there's really nothing all that special. You have the actual USB cable coming into your computer. You have the communication cable going back to the main unit, the fiber, and then the power, you know, all those things I talked about. And then you also have 2 other USBs. One of them is for this little hood thing, which I'll get into later. But yeah, that's kind of what you've got on the back. Really not much else going on there. And let me show you the other feature of this laser that I think is really cool, makes it kind of unique. The G2 has these 2 adjustment knobs down there, and if you loosen them, you can use this to tilt the head. Now they claim that you can, you know, engrave something at a 45, something like that. I think it just kind of adds a little bit more flexibility if you don't have a perfectly flat object. One thing that is worth noting is there is no positive stop, so you could very easily, I don't know, tilt it like that and lock it down and it wouldn't be perfectly flat. It would be really nice if maybe even they just had a bubble level on this or something. You just kind of have to eyeball a little bit to get it right. So that's what the tilt feature is, but you can take this whole head off and attach it to that little fume extractor thing. So let's see what that looks like. So this was one of the selling features for me of the unit. It allows you to use it kind of in this pseudo portable mode, and it kind of looks like a laser gun. But it allows you to just kind of place it directly on your workpiece. Not everything is going to fit just on that little base, so this allows you to bring the laser directly to it, set it on top, and because this is kind of a square or rectangular-ish thing, you can maybe do some grid lines, you can maybe 3D print like a little frame around it. You can figure out ways to line this up nice and perfect, and obviously with the red dot laser preview you can use that as well. But I like this feature of it, and also has this little fan on the back. I'm not sure how useful that tiny little fan is, but that plugs into the back of the unit for some exhaust, and it adds a bit of versatility to this unit that I think is pretty cool. So that was my preview of the Gweike G2 20-watt fiber laser. I need to do a lot more testing with this, but overall it looks pretty legit. This seems to be about on par or slightly better than all of the other 20-watt fiber lasers that are out there. It uses the Raycus fiber module, which is fantastic. It has the galvo head, it has the stand, it has all those things. I think the only kind of gripes that I have so far is that they didn't put any scales anywhere on here. Focus adjustment is pretty critical on this, as well as it is pretty much all lasers, and some kind of scale on that would be nice. Some kind of positive end stop, like a little detent on there, would have been nice. But everywhere where things count, like having a nice build quality on the actual laser module itself, having nice build quality on this, all of that stuff is definitely there. This stuff all feels really decent, and I have no concerns there. It uses the standard EasyCAD software, which is kind of relabeled as like the Gweike laser software, but no concerns anywhere there. This is a legit product, very reminiscent from the Gweike Cloud CO2 laser that I reviewed. Where it counts, it'll get the job done, but it, it's missing a lot of those fancy bells and whistles that a lot of companies like to put on their products that, I don't know, you don't end up using, but they kind of make the Kickstarter look better, if that makes sense. So anyway, I really like this laser. Be on the lookout for more videos on it. Check out the links down below. The disclaimer that I should say is Gweike did send me this unit, but they had no say in the making of this video whatsoever. They're seeing it for the first time as you are. They do not get to dictate my content whatsoever, but they've also been very good to work with, and I really do like working with them. They seem like a pretty cool company. So anyway, thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Check out the links down below. Bye.